The phone rang again and again. It was the fourth time in 8 minutes, all from the same number, all ignored by the head of homicide for the Sûreté de Québec in the hopes it would go away. But like most things ignored, it got worse. So The Grey Wolf is the 19th in the Chief Inspector Gamache series. And it is set in pretty much in Three Pines, which is a small fictional village south of Montreal in Quebec. And it also has a core group of characters, which I've used in the past. And the main character is Chief Inspector Armand Gamache of the Sûreté de Québec. And it starts off where he and his wife are in their garden having a relaxing Sunday, and the phone rings. And it rings and it rings, and he doesn't want to answer it, which is unusual for him. When he finally does, the call propels him worldwide, actually, as he tries to uncover a terrorist plot that has to do with the vulnerability of the infrastructure. It has to do with loyalties. It has to do with trust. All those issues are brought together in a book that I hope is broad in scope, but also very intimate, finally. The books are many things, and they are crime novels, they're thrillers, but really at their core, they are a number of other things, including an examination of duality, of the gap between what we think and what we say, between how we feel and our actions. And the same with the plots of books as well. They can incorporate, encapsulate this duality as well. So it can be broad and political in scope, but the best way, I think, to make it manageable and palatable for the reader is to see it through the eyes of characters who you care about. And so there needs to be that intimacy as well. I love Chief Inspector Gamache. When I first designed these books, which was 20 years ago, every decision I made was selfish. And so I created a village I would love to live in, villagers who would be friends, and then came time to create the main character. And I had heard that Agatha Christie, this may be just myth, grew weary of Poirot. And I didn't want to have that happen if I was lucky enough to have the books turned into a series. So I thought, now how do I mitigate against that? And I thought, I should create a man I would marry. And so that's what I did. I gave him all the qualities that I respect, not just in a man, but in a human being. And then I realized, I came down for breakfast one day and I looked across the table and I realized that I hadn't actually created Chief Inspector Gamache. I had transcribed him from my husband, who was the head of hematology at the Montreal Children's, and really the doctor you never want to meet because he had to deal with desperately ill children and say things to young parents no young parent should ever have to hear. But he came home just joyous, not because that wasn't shattering, which it was, but because he learned from those young people who don't get to, what I just did, wipe gray from their eyes, what a gift life is, and what a betrayal it would be for those young people who don't get to live it if those of us who do don't do it with joy, with gratitude, with courage. I learned that from Michael, and that's what Gamache has as well. He is a happy man. He's unusual, I think, in this kind of fiction. He is content. He is in a happy marriage. He has the loyalty of his colleagues. And he's aware of how fortunate he is because he sees so much death. It's not because he's too stupid to see how cruel the world is. He's very well aware of that. But he chooses to stand in the light. The idea of the gray wolf and then the black wolf is about choice. And the parable is that we do have these two inside of us. And the question is, which of them will win? Because they're battling. The gray wolf wants us to be kind, forgiving. The black wolf wants us to be brutal, unforgiving, just mean. And the question is, which one is going to win? And the answer is the one that we feed. So it's about choice. And that's how it plays out in the book. It's about the choices the characters make every day. Do they turn left? Do they turn right? Do they trust this person? Do they not trust that person? So that's really how it plays out in the book and also in our personal lives. I love talking about the setting of my book, talking about Three Pines. Three Pines is actually a code. And I didn't realize this till I went to a church dinner shortly after moving into the community with Michael. And we went to this church basement, had free spaghetti. And I sat beside this elderly woman who was describing driving by their family home that they had just had to sell. And one of the trees had been cut down. And she drove up, pounded on the door, and demanded to know why they cut down one of the trees. Well, the poor person who just bought the house, terrified, said, well, it was rotten, it fell. And she accepted that and she left. And I was saying to her, I understand that you'll forever feel an ownership of the property, but why were you so angry? And she said, well, it was one of the three trees, one of the three pines. And I asked her what that meant. And she said Three Pines was a code for the loyalists who remained loyal to the crown during the American Revolution. They flooded across the border into Canada, but they didn't know where the border was. So the Canadians would plant three pines to show the loyalists that they were safe. So it has been a signal of safety, of a haven, of a harbor. And I heard that story many years before I started writing, but it spoke to me. And I think it speaks to most people, that desire to find a quiet place in the bright sunshine. I started writing. I put that away. And then I suffered from writer's block for many years. And I started writing and describing this village after 9/11 because I think it came home to all of us, no one more than the Americans, of course, but to us worldwide, that you can never guarantee safety. And here in the UK, there was 7/7, and it was just, there is no way to say that you're safe anywhere, on a subway, on a bus, at work, anywhere. So you can never guarantee physical safety, but you can guarantee emotional safety. And you do it by having a community around you. You do it by having a sense of friendship. So the books became about that, about our yearning to belong, our yearning for that haven. And that's what Three Pines offers. And that's what I was searching for. And I realized that nothing separates me from anyone else except a whole lot of great good fortune. If I feel like I want something, then there's a pretty good chance other people do. And I want to feel safe, emotionally safe. I want friends around me. And again, in the pandemic, that became very obvious, that we need a community around us. I think there are a few reasons why the Chief Inspector Gamache books resonate with readers worldwide. I hope it's characters that people can identify with, a setting that they find compelling. But I think finally it is the theme of decency. I think we all want to be decent. I think we all want to find common ground. I think of what's happening now in the world, and I think of the people whose politics are very different from mine, but that if I was in trouble and knocked on their door, they would let me in. They wouldn't ask, who did you vote for? They would be there for me as I would be there for them. And I think that's what the books talk about, is that core of decency throughout all of us. I read a lot of poetry, and among my favorites is Auden. And the books, really the spine throughout the entire series comes from this couplet from his poem to Melville. And it starts off, goodness existed, that was the new knowledge. His terror had to blow itself quite out to let him see it. And I don't think there is a soul who reaches a certain age who hasn't felt terror, either from exterior fear or the fears that we create ourselves and carry around inside us. But I think that one of the reasons the books resonate and have found a worldwide audience is because they're about goodness. goodness, kindness. And so many people, I think, have mistaken it for weakness. And it takes so much more courage to be decent, to be kind, than anybody can come up with a cruel or cutting remark. Anybody can be mean. Anybody can stand in the shadows and hide there. It takes a lot of courage to be decent and stand in the sunshine. And that's what these books invite people to do. And I think that's why people are drawn to them, because people want to be. I know I do. I know I'm not always like that. I know sometimes I say things that I regret. I do things that I regret. But there's always a way back. You can always, I think of Three Pines as a state of mind. I think Three Pines exists wherever I am when I am kind. And there's comfort in that. And as I say, I'm not always there, but I know how to find my way home. One of the ways I'm able to keep a series fresh is, frankly, by eclairs. I love eclairs. Cheesecake. You think I'm kidding. Sometimes it's hard to get to the laptop because it's so scary. So sometimes I have to, oh, look, it's an eclair as a reward for my writing. I have in front of me a poster with the last words of the poet, of course, Seamus Heaney, who on his deathbed said to his wife, "Noli timere," which means be not afraid. And I think that's how I try to keep it fresh, is to keep reaching, keep challenging myself, keep trying harder, taking risks. The gray wolf was a risk. The black wolf is a risk. The fact that they are two halves of a whole, which is something I've never done before, is a risk. But if it works, what great rewards. And I don't mean financial rewards, though one can always hope. It's really the reward of having done something that you didn't think you could do. It was Eleanor Roosevelt who said, we must do the thing we think we cannot do. And that's how I keep it fresh. I find it interesting how often people describe writing as being really isolating. And it certainly can be. I mean, you can't write and have a conversation at the same time. And I write all alone in my dining room. I have the two dogs beside me and the fireplace on. And it's heaven. It's the best job ever. But it can be lonely at times. But at the same time, I'm never more plugged in to the world around me than when I'm writing a book, because I am paying such close attention to the details, to what a snowflake feels like, to what it tastes like, to what the wood fire smells like and looks like as it's going out of the chimney, to what an eclair tastes like. I have a lot of experience with that. So I'm listening to conversations as well and paying attention to people, because I often think that, and this is a broad stroke statement, that perhaps the best writer isn't the loudest person in the room. They're probably the ones sitting quietly listening to other people. And I love doing that. I love just listening. And so I'm very involved. So that's how I get some of my ideas. Many of them are from newspaper articles. In The Grey Wolf, for instance, there is a thread that runs through it about chartreuse. And I read it years ago. I read an article on how chartreuse was made, which is fascinating. And I cut it out and I put it on my corkboard and thought, one day I'm going to use that. And voila, the day is here. I've wanted to write a book since I was 8. Now, I know you're probably thinking, oh my God, she's 67, she's going back to when she's 8. Fortunately, it's a wonderful story. I was born afraid of everything. I was afraid of the night, I was afraid of the daylight, I was afraid of the morning dew, I was afraid of heights and holes, hugely afraid of other children. It was so bad that when I was naughty, which was very rare, as punishment, my mother would send me outside to play. All I ever wanted to be was in my bed, safe, sovereign, alone, and reading. My major fear, not unusual for children, was spiders. And I remember the moment, that moment of clarity where I was reading Charlotte's Web, a beautiful book, and I suddenly realized not only was Charlotte a spider, which I hope I had clued into a little earlier, but that I loved Charlotte, and I didn't want anything bad to happen to her. And in that instant, my main fear in life was lifted, my fear of spiders. And for a little girl whose entire life, certainly entire day, was prescribed by trying to do the least fearful thing, to have the most fearful thing lifted was a miracle. It was powerful. And I knew that if the story was that powerful, how amazing must writing be? And so I wanted to be a writer from that day on. Now, unfortunately, my fear of spiders was immediately replaced by a fear of writing. So it took me almost 40 years to get the courage up. Fear is such a thief. To get the courage up to actually risk it, to try, because I was terrified. Suppose I fail. Suppose I can't do it. And so I realized if it's not now, then when's it going to be? And so I started writing. And again, if I'm ever approached, or when I am approached by emerging authors asking for advice, I give them two pieces of advice. One is read poetry. Not everybody likes it, but I suggest it. And the other is just write a book you would read. I think one of the reasons I couldn't write for such a long time was I was trying to write for the approval of others, for my mother, for my colleagues, for my former professors who thought I was an idiot, for my brothers, for complete strangers. And it wasn't simply the need for approval, it was the fear of disapproval. And so that's what was paralyzing me. And what finally broke that was realizing that if I'm going to ever achieve my dream, I have to let that go. And I have to simply write for myself, whether it's published or not, whether it's any good or not, doesn't matter. The contract with my 8-year-old self be that I reach the end. One of the things that broke my writer's block was, again, sitting on my bed. A lot of things seem to happen on my bed. Michael used to call me a horizontalist because I spent most of my time trying to get my feet up reading. But I was sitting on the side of the bed and I looked on the bedside table, and like most of the people watching today, I read small c Catholically. I read fiction and nonfiction. I read newspaper articles. I love cookbooks and looking at cookbooks, even though I myself am not a cook. I read all sorts of fiction, but very well represented in my bedside table pile was crime fiction. And that's when I realized that's what I need to be writing. Because crime fiction also, my books, are not about the crime. They are very proudly crime fiction. But that's the Trojan horse that allows me to look at human nature, at what it is to be human, at how we respond in moments of extremis, or in the quiet moments as well, to look at all sorts of elements. And it's endlessly fascinating. It really is the best job ever. So that's how I came to write crime fiction, was that I read it, I enjoy it, and it is the great leaping off point to looking at human nature. I read a lot. I'm hesitant to say this, but I struggle now to read my contemporaries, which is really the only sad thing in a life that has been amazing beyond anything I ever had a right to expect. But I love crime fiction, and I find that I can't read my contemporaries because if it's really good, and it's like a golden age right now of crime writing. It's so exciting, amazing writers out there. But if it's really good, and many of them are, that's the only book I want to write, is the one I've just read, which is not recommended. Or it's really bad, and then I'm annoyed. And a lot of it is I like reading for escape. And if it's crime fiction, I'm always analyzing. This is brilliant. How are they doing that? This isn't working. Why not? So I find myself reading either nonfiction, a lot of nonfiction, or the Golden Age, the older ones. Right now I'm rereading the Maigret, Georges Simenon books, Josephine Tey. I love the franchise affair, but most people feel that her masterpiece was The Daughter of Time. But these books are so clear. The writing is crystalline. The character development is there. It's very exciting, and I don't feel compelled to rewrite The Daughter of Time. So the books 2, 3, 4, and a novella that I wrote called The Hangman were adapted by Prime into a limited series. I was the executive producer, or one of them, and I thought that gave me enough power. It turns out I was wrong. Everyone was very nice. Gave me lunches and nodded and smiled when I spoke, but they didn't really want to hear what I had to say, which was incredibly painful. I feel I owe my characters a duty of protection, and I wasn't doing it. I wasn't able to protect them, and it was incredibly painful. Now, having said that, they did make some adjustments. They could see having an unhappy author is probably not the best thing to have happen in a series. So I'm somewhat ambivalent. I thought the actor, Alfred Molina, who played Gamache, did a very good job. There's a storyline to do with Indigenous missing women and children, which was very powerful, which wasn't my storyline, but I was happy to sign off on it. I think they missed a lot of what the heart and soul is of the books. People come to my books, I hope, because they think and find the plots compelling. But they come back to them because they love the characters and get to know the characters, care about the characters. And there wasn't a lot of that in the series. So it's, as I say, it's kind of ambivalent. And there's a lot to risk and not a huge amount at this point to gain, except the excitement of actually, if they do it well, and there are many, the Anne Cleeve's books are doing brilliantly. Others have been done, the Mick Herron books, brilliant, and others as well. I think mine, they struggle with a lot because there is such a duality between the plots, which I hope are strong, but also the characters and the character development, which is also strong. And I think they struggle to bring those two together. The Grey Wolf, I don't think I'm giving anything away here, ends with a character saying, "We have a problem." The Black Wolf starts with them saying, "We have a problem." And then we try to figure out, or they do, what that problem is. It is, much like the Grey Wolf, it is sweeping in scope, but in some ways even more intimate than the Grey Wolf, in that the main character, Gamache, spends his whole time actually in the village, whereas others go out. But really, it's a look at what happens when you have a lot and your neighbor has very little. When you have a wealth of water and food and power and your neighbor is starving, and your neighbor happens to be very powerful and not happy to share. But I think you can guess what happens. And that's where the tension is in The Black Wolf. The Grey Wolf is available from all good bookstores and your local library. Subscribe to the Queen's Reading Room for more bookish content.